Well, welcome back to our final session, and we're absolutely thrilled that Mikaela Jade has agreed to be our final keynote for this afternoon. And I'll just briefly introduce Mikaela to you. So Mikaela is a Gabonese woman of the Dual-speaking nation of Sydney, and her company, Indigital, is Australia's first Indigenous edutech company and has a mission to create opportunities for First Peoples in using and designing frontier technologies by teaching cutting-edge digital skills through a cultural lens. In only 18 months, Indigital's flagship program, Indigital Schools, has worked with 7,000 students across Australia to improve their understanding of Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander cultures through teaching spatial web technologies, including augmented and mixed reality. And Mikaela is a member of the World Economic Forum Global Future Council on augmented reality and virtual reality. So we certainly have a true expert joining us this afternoon. So welcome, Mikaela, and we'll hand the floor over to you. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Vicki. Thanks very much for having me this afternoon. I'm really excited to get the opportunity to share a little bit of my culture and a little bit of my experience in technology. So today, as Vicki mentioned, I will be speaking about the spatial web. But firstly, I would like to acknowledge my ancestors, the Darug-speaking nations of Sydney. Particularly, I'm from the Cabral clan. My totems are Bungu, which is possum for women, and Garowe, which is my personal totem, cockatoo. I have responsibility to my lands and to all the ecosystem that surrounds these two special animals. I'd also like to acknowledge and pay my respects to the elders and traditional owners of the country that I'm on today. I'm coming to you from Ngunnawal country in Canberra, and I extend these respects to other Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander peoples that are here today with us. So I am going to be talking about spatial web technologies. Now, you may have heard Zook recently talk about the metaverse. You may have heard it called Web 3.0. The truth is nobody knows what this next version of the internet is officially going to be called. I'm going with spatial web because I think it really explains a little bit more about what it is rather than metaverse, which is actually coined from a snow crash in around 1992, I think, meaning many verses, but meta also means after or the afterlife or what's next. So I don't really want to go to the afterlife just yet. So I'm resisting the term metaverse, but other people seem to be using it, and it probably will catch on as the metaverse. So this is what I'm talking about, the same thing. So basically, I'd like to just imagine for a minute that you're in a library in 2027 and you're researching the Darug people. You're wanting to know a little bit about our history, a little bit about who we are today in 2027, and you want to also research what our aspirations are for being future peoples. Now, you're a bit kind of interested in how this might happen back in 2021. And if you're in 2021, you would be using what we call the flat web, which is what we're on today, doing this presentation. And obviously there's loads of resources on the flat web. They're all interconnected websites, and you can find videos, pictures, books. Most things have been digitized. But it's really hard for you to ask questions of these things. This is all outward-facing content, and unless you're on an online chat with the traditional owner from the Darug community, it's going to be really hard for you to ask questions. So there's a lot of pushing out of information on the flat web that we're on today. We have been imagining since 2012 at Indigital what the next iteration of the internet looks like and how you interface with cultural peoples in that version of the internet. And we've been building it. But the thing is, everyone that's building holograms or augmented and mixed reality and virtual realities is actually doing that on the foundation of the flat web. So we're trying to use tools that were designed for the past to create future technologies. And we're doing pretty well with that. So we can create holograms now, we can embed them with machine learning, and you can ask questions of holograms, but it's still using pretty old infrastructure to try and create the new technologies that we all imagine. So let's step forward to 2027 potentially, which was dreamed up back in 1942 in the military, but was most vividly captured in Star Wars in the 80s. Everyone remembers that really cool moment where Princess Leia turned up as a hologram to like give them really critical information that they needed. So we can build those holograms now. They're in pretty wide use around the world. But what we'd like to see with these holograms, and as it was imagined, was more of this kind of diagram. So it's a place where people, places, and things are linked as well as information. So it's more like this dynamic spatial version of interlinked websites. So this is what we're trying to build now as a community of people that are working in Web 3.0 or the spatial web or the metaverse. It's not quite built yet, but there are a lot of engineers and technologists and ethicists working on this at the moment, and we're lucky to be involved in conversations around developing the spatial web at Indigital. So this is kind of what we have now. It's a mixture of virtual realities where you put the headset on and you're kind of shut out of the real world and you can walk around. I've got a little snippet here of a virtual reality world that we work in today. They can be pretty dynamic, so you can obviously have live feeds into virtual reality and talk to each other, and it's kind of like Zoom but in 3D. Then we have augmented reality, which is a reality that you can experience through tablets or phones or headsets. And it's really just placing a pretty static piece of digital content on top of the real world. So you can see really cool holograms and they can be doing really cool things, but there's no real ability to interact with that content. So it's just you seeing it placed in the real world in 3D, which is really cool, but you can't really ask it a question. Mixed reality there is the next one along, and that's what really the foundation of well, not the foundation, but one of the really critical components of the spatial web will be is mixed reality. So it's really evolving the context of virtual realities and augmented realities and putting them together in a really dynamic, live, geospatially anchored environment where you can interact with not just people, but you can interact with holograms. Indigital have worked with Telstra and Microsoft to create cultural holograms that mixed reality, where we created a message stick with my uncle Lex, a physical message stick. So this is like a carving from a piece of branch or tree. They're really beautiful. They were the first letters in the world, and our communities used to run them across community and country to share messages for really important things. So he created one of those as a physical cultural asset, and then when you put your phone or tablet or headset, augmented reality, virtual reality, mixed reality headset over it, our elders appeared in holographic format, and we embedded them with machine learning, which means the algorithm inside the hologram, or the application that appears to be inside the hologram, can recognize the questions that you're asking it and respond to you in direct and in English. So as we're building out a little bit of this stuff already, but there's so much more that we can do with it. So it's a little bit of a description of kind of the different kinds of realities that we have today. And also there's actual reality, which we all live in, hopefully. Not sure how everyone feels at the moment, having been through 2 years of a pandemic. Not sure if this is actual reality. Probably like to go back to the old reality that we used to have. So there's going to be a lot of changes coming, and they're already being built, as I mentioned. So you can see kind of through this diagram, which I really love, from Gabriel Rene. If you're interested in this stuff, he's got a book called The Spatial Web, which is absolutely fantastic reading on what the future of Web 3.0 will be. But you can see that it's divided down into the data that it is required for each of these iterations of the internet, the logic or the algorithms that work behind it, and then the interface that you experience the content through. And you can see we've been through PC, we went through Web 1.0, everyone remembers Firefox and Yahoo, and then we've been living in Web 2.0, which is what we're in now. And you can see that the difference between Web 2.0 and Web 3.0 in terms of the way that it works, you can see that the data foundation for Web 3.0 is going to be blockchain. The logic that interprets all that data is going to be AI, probably mostly machine learning, but there's also Internet of Things devices that are required to give life to this metaverse. And then you can see the interface will be through augmented reality, virtual reality, mixed reality, and it will also have some IoT interface there as well. So a really big change coming from Web 2.0 to Web 3.0, which is exciting, but there's also a lot of things that we need to think about in that. Matthew Ball is probably the most prolific writer and the most detailed writer on the metaverse. So I'd recommend checking out his website, which is matthewball.vc. And he talks about the componentry of, or what makes up the metaverse. And obviously there's hardware that's going to be necessary. There's compute power. The compute power that is envisaged to power this metaverse is 5G. At the moment, and there'll be probably 6G and iterations that go on into the future that will just get faster and faster, enable more and more capacity for more and more Internet of Things devices to be connected into this new version of the web. There's also the networking capability that needs to be built. This is probably like the hardest part of building the metaverse at the moment. There's the virtual platforms, which we already are seeing the first iterations of virtual platforms being built. That's what Mark Zuckerberg's talking about with Meta, the new branding of Facebook. Every single big tech company is making a play in virtual platforms at the moment. One key thing about the metaverse that a lot of us are talking about internationally is making sure that it maintains its openness as an internet, though. I guess one of our biggest fears at the moment is it becoming a technology lock-in to one corporation or just a handful of corporations. That'd be quite economically and culturally dangerous. And then there's obviously the interchange tools and standards that need to be rebuilt. The key thing about metaverse in terms of payments and handling money is that it's baked into the metaverse. So blockchain really helps with that payment through cryptocurrencies. And then there's content services and assets that we all already experience through Web 2.0 will need to be migrated into the Web 3.0. So that sounds really cool. Except there's a whole group of people that have been shut out of the design of this metaverse. And as a Darug woman, I am one of those. And I'm just going to stop this share now. So something that obviously getting involved in metaverse technologies is incredibly expensive. It requires some degree of digital skills. And it's, we really don't have access to it as Darug Mob. So I started doing an exploration a couple of years ago and really consolidating it in a Masters of Applied Cybernetics last year about what does it mean to be a cultural person in this metaverse and how can our cultural knowledges help shape the new version of the web? Because the last thing that we want is a place where underserved, underprivileged and overexploited peoples are not able to access it. Mostly because it will have a huge impact on our ability to have economies around our communities. So I guess a question too is like, why do we want to interface with the spatial web? And I think there are reasons why our mob have been really dealing in multiverse and multi realities for 80,000 years through our dreaming and through our knowledge systems. Our elders already see things from different spheres. And so we do have a good sense of responsibility about what it takes to be both grounded in the physical reality and also have responsibility and custodianship over spatial realities. We can really bring a lot of knowledge to the design of these systems. Also, we're asking questions about when is it appropriate for us to be in the spatial web and when is it not? So an example around that is the creation of digital avatars. It's envisaged, for example, places like libraries where you'll be able to evoke avatars of people that you want to have conversations with from the past. that's fantastic and enables you to get insights into a particular person, people's cultures or places. However, what happens if it does not, or if it was not created by our mob? So imagine a Darug elder is able to be triggered in your library, but that avatar was actually digitally created by not a Darug person or not family members of that person. Is it still a cultural, is it still cultural knowledge, and is it still valid? Which also means who should do this kind of work? Like, who is responsible for creating cultural knowledge systems in the metaverse, spatial web 3.0? Is it all of our jobs to do this, and therefore do we all need the digital skills to be able to do this responsibly and respectfully and with reciprocity? Or is it down to experts? Our community, the Darug community, been having conversations about this, because in our community we have medicine people, we have law people, we have language people. Do we need digital people that can not just create the content but also enable the bringing along of the rest of our mobs on this journey too? It's a question that we're asking. And if we do see this as a specialist skill within our community, how are we wrapping the resources and the rest of the community around to support those people to do this properly and with cultural responsibility? How do we manage Indigenous cultural intellectual property and moral rights in this holographic world? It's a really interesting question, because even now in our two-dimensional web world, we have very little cultural protections around our language, knowledge and law. So imagine when you can walk down a street on Darug land in Parramatta, say, for example, and you can just you can look at that real world through any lens that you wish. And one of those lenses might be how Darug mob saw this place, or how the place was presented in 1788 before colonisation. How do we protect the Indigenous knowledge systems that go with understanding what life was like before colonisation, with that knowledge being passed down through our families since then? I feel that there's a key responsibility for us to be able to share those stories in a culturally responsible way. And also, what do the licensing arrangements look like for that? Personally, my family, we were the custodians, and still are the custodians, we just don't have physical custodianship of the place, is the Holsworthy military base. So my direct descendants were removed from there, so that could become a military base, and we're no longer able to go on that place. So when cultural representations are being made for that place, how are we able to intersect and interface with that, particularly with lands that we don't have access to at the moment? Another thing that I've been really confronted with as a holographic developer is I was able to use a deepfake technology to bring back to life, and I'm going to put that in inverted commas because it's just data and light. It's by no means life. My ancestor from a painting that was done of her in the 1800s. So it's in a book, in a library. I use that image by simply opening the application, placing my phone over her two-dimensional image, and the deepfake technology has generated a 3D hologram. I tapped my screen, and all of a sudden my ancestor was staring me in the face at my height, looking at me. And that was really confronting as a Darug woman. The bit that really got me, though, was completely unexpected. It was when the avatar turned around, and for the very first time, I could see her facial profile. I'd never been able to see that in a book, and I have to say that brought me to tears. Being able to see someone in 3 dimensions when you've only ever known them in 2 dimensions, like, you need to prepare yourself for that. The other thing that was really confronting for me in doing that was there's not many females, and there's definitely not many Indigenous women, if at all, who are creating the algorithms and developing the technologies for this stuff to be generated. So their idea of when a female is being made into a hologram using their application is that she appears with big busts, a crop top and skinny jeans. So you can imagine what it's like as a cultural person to see my cultural ancestor, who is depicted in her full regalia, to be then turned into a 3D hologram, life-size, wearing a crop top, big boobs, skinny jeans. It was super inappropriate. So yeah, there's those kind of things to consider, and there's just so few females and so few cultural people working in this space at the moment. I actually think it's quite dangerous to think about what will be produced in the future. Something else that's happened to me recently is that one of our cultural places was recently destroyed to make way for a museum in Sydney. And we know that ancestors were buried on that land. Now, before that place was destroyed, there was a photogrammetry, a volumetric capture of the site. One of the questions that we're left holding as Darug Mob is, with that three-dimensional representation of that place now, which you can view in virtual reality or augmented reality, how do we honour our buried dead ancestors in that digital copy now that the physical place no longer exists? So we've been having discussions about Aboriginal digital land rights. What happens when our cultural places, our cultural objects like scar trees, and the likes of our really important cultural elements are captured as digital twins? How do we have any rights over those, and how are we supposed to apply our cultural protocols over them as well, and other embedded knowledges, and who should be the custodian of that? One of the other questions that we're asking too is, who should be responsible for the ongoing costs of these captures? Say, for example, Juukan Gorge was captured before it was blown up. And that is of national significance, particularly now that it's no longer existing. And people are saying potentially libraries are the custodians of these places, or the National Archives. Who's responsible for the ongoing costs and digital upgrades of that? Because they're huge file sizes. They take a lot of data hosting, and they will also need to be upgraded as we migrate to Web 3.0 and beyond that. So there is a real question around the reasons that we're capturing something, and and the austerity that goes with doing that. So that's another really important thing to think of, particularly as an institution where you might be responsible all of a sudden for not just holding books and videos and images. You might be responsible for holding holographic digital twins that are very large. Yeah, and I guess the last question I'll leave you with is, how do we deal with the what's next? There's a lot of work being done with brain-machine interfaces. There's a lot of work around neuro rights, particularly in Chile at the moment. They're really taking this very seriously, where there needs to be rights put in place for people's right to their own private thoughts as we move into more biometrically driven technologies to be able to experience all this content. So a lot to think about, a lot to squish into 20 minutes. I hope I've given you like a bit of a up on the balcony view of what the metaverse is all about and some of the questions that we're asking as cultural peoples.
Thank you very much, Mikaela. So I certainly, I think you've captured a lot of the themes that we've talked about during this afternoon, like new business models, digital acceleration, those sorts of things. But I think you've also asked a lot of questions that are also challenging for us to be thinking about. And I guess I'm also getting lots of questions from the audience that sort of replicate the sort of challenges that you've talked about. I guess you mentioned the ongoing costs of preservation, and I guess that's going to be one of the big issues as well, is preserving this content for future generations. It's just not for now, but for future. Have you sort of explored that as well as how we're going to address those sorts of issues?
Yeah, definitely. So I think there needs to be a national account to be able to fund a lot of this stuff. And it's not just the future stuff that we're going to capture in terms of digital twins. Like, there's a massive digital effort at the moment to digitize absolutely everything that are in archives and libraries and museums and galleries. And everyone seems to want a digital copy of everything, which of course consumes such an enormous amount of energy, and it costs a lot of money to do that as well. So there's the sustainability question that we need to ask around captures too. And we certainly ask that in my company. Is this a valid use of the technology, and is it worth the environmental cost of doing it to capture it? Yeah.
You also, you raised a lot of concerns around, really important issues like moral rights, cultural safety, respect, those sorts of things. And I guess one of the questions that I've received from the audience is there's a lot of discussion around the bias that's embedded in the development of AI. So particularly around facial and voice recognition, it's always been, white people coming through and things like that. How do we avoid this in the next iteration with Web 3.0?
Yeah, well, that's the whole reason for my company existing, I guess, is we're doing a national digital skills program that teaches not just First Peoples, but all peoples through a cultural lens. So our hope is that the investment in today's generation will transpire into people being more conscious of all the diversity and inclusion things they need to think about as technologists and engineers and ethicists and visual creators, visual content creators. Yeah, it's going to be the long game, and that's kind of, I guess, the dichotomy, because we need the skills now. I think there's a shortfall of around 120,000 jobs at the moment in this space just in Australia, and that's not considering international. And we need them now, and we just don't have the skill base in Australia. And we certainly, it's a little bit scary because people that were educated in my era weren't necessarily taught about First Nations cultures. So we don't have that skill set in people that are developing this stuff now. And we also don't have the rapid uptake and upskilling of digital skills either. So it's a real conundrum. And obviously the technology is advancing a lot quicker than what we can keep up with education and making sure people are supported in these careers too. Something that is really difficult as an Aboriginal person working in technology is that there are a lot of biases. There are a lot of language things around technology, like even stuff like male and female plugs. A lot of the dialogue that's used in the technology sector is quite gender specific and also a little bit racist, like you have black and white. Yeah, there's a lot that's really uncomfortable about being a minority person in the technology sector. So addressing that at the same time, there's just a lot to do, right?
There is, and you've certainly, you've given us a good overview of where you're heading, but also the challenges, and that you've identified your challenges. And I think many of the things that you've talked about are challenges are things that we in libraries and museums and galleries are also dealing with as well. So I'm sure that we'd all certainly like to work with you as you continue to do the important work that you're doing. Unfortunately, we're out of time, but I know that you're on Twitter.
Yes.
So I think if want to reach out to you as well, they should do that as well. But I'd really like to thank you for sharing your important work with us this afternoon, and wish you luck as you continue.
Vicki, thanks, and thanks everyone for having me this afternoon. It's been great.